yesterday's Gemara. So we've been learning about these berries that are different colored, and we learned about removing them on Yom Tov, and if they were removed on Yom Tov, and we learned about dechoy, something is pushed aside. We got ourselves into an issue um, of the famous argument in the it's it's known in the laws of Shabbos, but really it applies throughout halacha. It's an argument between Reb Yehuda and Reb Shimon. It's a very famous argument. Whenever you learn the laws of Shabbos, this always comes up. It's called a davar she'enai miskavin, something that you did not intend. And this has to do, the example that we gave yesterday was you're dragging some type of couch or bed, and it's causing there to be a hole in the ground. You're causing a line of holes. What do you call it?
Furrows.
A furrow in the ground. Furrows in the ground. And what that basically is, why is that a problem on Shabbos? It's the malacha of plowing. And the question is, you're not trying to plow. You're not preparing the ground for planting or anything like that. What you're doing is just moving the bed. You need it for in your other apartment. So you're just pulling the couch or the bed to some other big chair. You're pulling it somewhere, and it might be making furrows in the ground. And the argument between Reb Shimon and Reb Yehuda is if this is allowed. Now, everyone agrees you're not allowed to go there and dig the ground and plow the ground. Everyone agrees that's prohibited. But what about, would you be allowed to pull a bed that might make furrows in the ground? And so it's called a davar she'enai miskavin. It's something that you're not intending. Now, what happens if it's it's a very heavy bed, and it's definitely going to make furrows in the ground? If it's definitely going to make furrows in the ground, then even Rabbi Shimon would agree that it's prohibited. Again, this is on Shabbos or on Yom Tov. You're not allowed to plow. And if a person were to plow, this would be a prohibition, a biblical prohibition. In the scenario that we're talking about, the person is pulling a bed, and it ends up making furrows in the ground, or it might make furrows in the ground. And because it might make furrows in the ground, here we have an argument to Reb Yehuda, Reb Shimon, which basically means that Reb Yehuda is more against you entering a case of dilemma, of possibility. And Reb Shimon is not concerned where you enter. In a certain sense, that's what they're dealing with. They're dealing with a case that we're not sure it's going to make furrows in the ground. And the Reb Yehuda says you can't do it. And Reb Shimon says you're allowed to. It's a davar she'enai miskavin. It's something you don't have and you don't intend. Now, if it's a very heavy bed that's definitely making furrows in the ground, so what do you want to say? You could still say, Reb Shimon says, I didn't have in mind to make furrows in the ground. I had in mind only to drag this bed. I'm not intending to make furrows. I need a bed. That's not my intent. It's davar she'enai miskavin. The thing is that Reb Shimon says no. If it's a psik reisha, if it's something that's inevitable, then we consider it as if you did intend that. In other words, it's prohibited, even according to Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon does not give you this blanket rule or permit that you could always do something that's einoi miskavin. If something's inevitably gonna happen, that this action, this malacha, this act that's prohibited on Shabbos is going to inevitably happen, then Reb Shimon agrees it's called the psik reisha. Our Gemara brought these laws of Shabbos, this idea of Shabbos, because our Gemara was talking about removing berries from a hadas. And so really it's not Shabbos that we're dealing with. Really, our Gemara is dealing with Yom Tov. But it's the same law. You're not allowed to dig or plow, or you're not allowed to plow on Yom Tov. So the same law would apply here. And how does it apply to picking a berry from a myrtle? What's the problem? What you're doing is you're making the myrtle usable for the mitzvah. What's the mitzvah? The mitzvah is to take the daled minim, take the 4 species. And what are you doing? You have 4 species that are not kosher because the hadas has too many berries. So you want to remove the berries. So the Gemara said that it brought a brisa. The Gemara brought a brisa. And the brisa had an argument. If one opinion is ein mematin b'yom tov, you can't remove them on Yom Tov. What's the reason why can't you remove berries on Yom Tov? Because removing berries on Yom Tov is called tikkun mana, called fixing a vessel. And there's a prohibition on Shabbos and on Yom Tov to do this act of fixing a mana, fixing a vessel on Shabbos or on Yom Tov. It's considered a melacha, a prohibited act, and therefore, when you fix a hadas for a mitzvah, that would also be part of that category of fixing a vessel. Of course, we would see it as if you have let's say a screwdriver that's bent, and you straighten it in order to make it usable. So that would be seemingly that would be an example of a tikkun mana. You're fixing the vessel, or you're taking nowadays we don't really do that much fixing. Everything you just throw out and buy something new. So it's hard to find a good example of fixing something. But trying to think of what we do nowadays that we would be considered fixing. But in the olden days, if you had a utensil that was broken, and you would fix it, Of course, today no one knows how to do anything, and no one wants to. But anyway, but the thing is, it's called tikkun mana, fixing a vessel, which is prohibited on Shabbos. So the you have to take that idea and apply it to a spiritual thing. You're fixing a hadas to work for the mitzvah. It's gonna be you fixed it. I mean, it's not really. Wasn't broken. A hadas is not really broken, but it wasn't usable for the mitzvah. And now you fixed it. So we're taking that idea of fixing a vessel and we're saying that's going to be prohibited on Yom Tov. You need, and the example that we gave was it has 52 berries and it has 50 leaves. In the majority, berries ruins it. If you remove 3, you'll have 49 berries and 50 leaves. It'll be kosher. But if it has 52 leaves, berries, it's invalid because it's majority berries, and the berries we already explained that we're talking about. It's a color that's not acceptable for hadassim, black or red, maybe possibly other colors we spoke about yesterday, different opinions. But in any event, we have an opinion here that says you're not allowed to remove them on Yom Tov. This opinion in the Brisa fits with our Mishnah. But then the Brisa brought another opinion that Mishum, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, Amru Mamatin, you are allowed to remove them on Yom Tov. And of course, the first question that the Gemara asks is, how could you allow such a thing? It's called Tikkun Mana. Now, in a certain sense, the way I'm explaining it now, you could see that maybe it's not exactly called fixing a vessel. You're applying this law to a mitzvah, to something that's not really a vessel, something's not broken. So there's of course a little wiggle room over there, or question to say, is this a definite thing that you apply? I mean, the Gemara makes it like it's obvious. You're not allowed to do this. You're doing a tikkun mana. And so the commentaries deal with, is this a rabbinic law based on the biblical law? In other words, there's a biblical law. You're not allowed to fix a vessel. But this is not exactly fixing a vessel. It's not broken. It's a hadas that's just not usable for a mitzvah. And now you're doing something that spiritually is changing it, making it, you're doing something physical with it, but it's becoming a mitzvah. It's becoming possible to to use for a mitzvah. So the commentaries see, most of them understand this as this is a rabbinic law similar to fixing a vessel. But it's not exactly fixing a vessel. Fixing a vessel would be a biblical prohibition on Shabbos, seemingly connected to Makkah B'Patish. You're bringing when you do that last bang of fixing, that's considered a biblical prohibition. But the understanding here is that it's rabbinic. Where do we see that? In the previous page, there was a Rashi that implied that, where it says Rashi implies that Rashi says that it's only a rabbinic law, it's not a biblical law. Let me pull up that Rashi here. Alvar Velikton. So he says, Rashi says that Rashi is like in the middle of the page on 33a. Rashi says Avar Velikton. In that Rashi, he says it's usher because of a rabbinic law. The truth is, other commentaries as well mention that idea that it's only a rabbinic law. There is one opinion that's understands it to be, or maybe a few opinions that understand it to be biblical, but that's that's not the common understanding. Well, I shouldn't say it's not the common understanding. There's different opinions. I should say there's different opinions. There's some opinions say that it's rabbinic. Some understand it to be biblical. Now, the Gemara. So the Gemara mentioned these two views. Are you allowed to remove the berries on Yom Tov? In the first opinion, we already explained is because the problem is because of tikkun maneh. The second opinion was we asked the question, why isn't this a problem of removing berries? It's at least rabbinically it should be prohibited. Why is it allowed? Why do you allow it? Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, we're asking a question on him. So what was the Gemara's answer to that question? The Gemara's answer to that question was that you pick them in order to eat. You didn't pick them in order to fix the hadas. So what do you think? Should that be allowed? If you pick the berries off in order to eat the berries, not to fix the hadas. So would this be permissible? Should this be allowed? You're not doing it to fix the hadas. You're doing it to eat. Which of course is another discussion. Is it edible? But your intent was to eat them, and you're picking them to eat them. Is that going to be? Is that allowed? What do you think? So this boils down to that other question. It's the other issue of psik reisha. It's inevitable. You are fixing this. You are fixing the hadas. You're naturally fixing it. You can't say it's like dragging a bed on the earth that it might make furrows, it might not. This, you can't say that. You are definitely making this hadas fit for the mitzvah. So if so, it doesn't help to give this explanation. Oh, davar she'enoi miskaven. I follow Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon is the father of Rabbi Elazar over here, and he said, "I follow my father's view. I follow my father's view because davar she'enoi miskaven." What do you mean, davar she'enoi miskaven? This is inevitable. It's going to happen no matter what. You're definitely making this hadas acceptable, and therefore it
Rabbi,
should be a problem. Yes, Ezra.
So if this was Shabbat, you wouldn't be able to pick a fruit off of a tree. So what's the difference with picking a berry off of the hadas.
The hadas. So the thing is, the hadas is already harvested from the ground. So it's a detached hadas that all you're doing is removing the berries from it. It's almost like if you have a cluster of grapes and you're taking grapes off a cluster that are in your refrigerator. So so it's much different than taking fruit off a tree. So so the thing is, the Gemara says, how does this help if you follow Reb Shimon and you say, I'm davar she'eino maskaven, I'm not intending to remove, I'm not intending to fix this hadas by removing the berries to fix the hadas. I'm intending to eat something. It doesn't help because automatically it's inevitable. It's going to be usable for a mitzvah. And that's the Gemara's question, that it doesn't help. It's not, you can't call this a davar she'eino maskaven. Even Reb Shimon has to agree that it's called a psik reisha. So the Gemara answers an interesting answer. What does the Gemara answer? The Gemara answers that here, what are we talking about? We're talking about the Islay Haishana, that you really have other Haishanas. You have other lulavs that are with Hadassim and Aravais all made up, and you don't need this. And therefore, you can't really say that you're fixing a vessel. How does Rashi learn this? So Rashi learns that because I have Hoshana Achriti, this is in the third line of the wide lines of Rashi on 33b. Rashi says, "V'loit tzarech lahai." I don't need this. Hilkach ein kan tikun kli deloit tzricha leilach shura. It's not called tikun kli. I don't need to make this good. It's not similar to when you cut off the head of a chicken and you're going to say it's not going to die. The hasam ikanetilas neshamim b'manavshach. There you for sure are doing it. It's called psik reisha. It's for sure going to happen. It's inevitable. Here, v'hacha leka tikun kli. Here it's not really a fixing of a vessel. If it wouldn't have another one, this would be called fixing. You would be considered making this into a vessel because now you need it. Even though you don't have in mind this, it'll be prohibited to have a psik reisha v'lo yamas. It's going to be considered a psik reisha v'lo yamas. So what Rashi basically is saying is that this type of case is an interesting case. It's a case where you can't really say that this is called a vessel. Why not? Even though you made it into a vessel, even though you made it usable, because this is not something that's naturally a vessel, and you can say, I fixed it into a vessel. This is something that's not really something that you would normally use. It happens to be for a mitzvah. I need to have a hadas. And when you take off the berries and make it usable for the hadas, it's still not really a vessel. And I'm not even planning on using it. Which basically means, what I mean to say, in other words, if I somehow, build out of wood, out of metal, I build some type of a tray, build a tray. So then you can't tell me, oh, I'm not using it. I'm not using it. So it should be okay. I'm not planning on using it. I have other trays. I'm not planning on using it. It should be allowed on Shabbos. No, you made a vessel. There, you definitely made a vessel. Here, it's not really called making a vessel. Why isn't it called making a vessel? Because is a hadas really a utensil? A hadas something that you normally use? It's not really something that you don't call that fixing. If I need it for the mitzvah, then that is what makes it into a vessel. In here, I don't really need it for the mitzvah because I have others. So if I don't need it for the mitzvah, you can't really say that I made this into the vessel. What are you going to say? I have other trays. I don't need this tray. I built a tray. Now I don't need that tray. You're going to say, oh, you didn't make a vessel? No, there I did make a vessel. Here you could say that this is not a real vessel. This is a quasi type of vessel where I'm using it for the mitzvah if I need it, but if I don't need it, I'm not really using it for the mitzvah. I'm taking off berries now to eat. It happens to be, it could be used for a mitzvah, but it's not being used for, it's not planning on being used for the mitzvah. And therefore you can't really say I fixed the vessel. So there's a big difference. I mean, of course, you have to think deeper into it, but the difference between this type of vessel and making an actual vessel. When you make an actual vessel, there is a vessel here. When you fix a hadas to make it usable, is it a did you really make a mitzvah hadas? Not necessarily. If you're not using it for the mitzvah, then it's not really, you didn't make it into a hadas, but you didn't really make it into it's not really a vessel. It's something that your thoughts could make it into a vessel because of your thought, because you want to use it for the mitzvah, that could make it into a vessel. So what comes out from this is that the Gemara's answer here, now this is what really changes things around a little. The Gemara's answer here is, you know what, we're not really following Reb Shimon now. At this point, you don't necessarily need to follow Reb Shimon's way of thinking, even according to Reb Yehuda's way of thinking. This fits, because what are you going to say? I picked berries to eat. I'm picking berries to eat. So you're going to say, what do you mean? It's a davar she'eino maskaven. You're making the hadas into a vessel. And so Reb Yehuda is going to say this is prohibited. How could you take berries to eat? You're making this into a vessel. You're making it usable for a hadas. And you hold davar she'eino maskaven is also, you hold that if you don't intend, it's still going to be prohibited. So what's Reb Yehuda going to answer? Reb Yehuda will say, or what's the Gemara going to answer this? The Gemara will say it's no problem. It's not a problem. You're not using this for this hadas for the mitzvah. I have other hadasim. I have other shlulav. I'm not using this for the mitzvah. So I never even made a vessel. In other words, the Gemara is not answering that's psik reisha. It's not a psik reisha. The Gemara is answering, you know what? The whole thing was wrong. We're calling this davar she'eino maskaven. We're calling davar she'eino maskaven. That's not really the case. This is a case where it's not going to be a kli. I'm not making it into a kli. That's the way Rashi is learning. So in other words, the Gemara is backing off from the previous answer of saying, this Rebbe Elazar is following his father's opinion. Once the Gemara comes to this idea, the Isla Yoshana Achriti is basically backing off and saying, no, we don't need this concept of davar she'eino maskaven. It's psik reisha. We don't have to deal with that. It's because you're not making a kli now. But this is a quasi type of kli in the first place. And now if you have another one, you're not really making it a kli. It's not needed for sukkahs. That means you're not making it a kli. You're eating, all you're doing when someone asks you, what are you doing? I'm eating berries. Am I making a vessel out of this? No, I have my lulav is in shul. I have my lulav in shul. It's all set. I'm making a lulav. I'm making a hadas. This is not a vessel. If I was going to use it for the mitzvah, you could say that it's similar to making a vessel. I'm not using it for the mitzvah. It's not called similar to. So even Rabbi Yehuda should allow this. So what comes out is if you have another hadas, so then it's not even called making a kli. That's the way Rashi seems to learn. There are other ways of learning this Gemara. Like, in other words, the final answer of the Gemara, at least the simple way that the Gemara sounds like, is that it's not backing off. Normally, if the Gemara backs off from the previous way of understanding, then the Gemara often will say the word Ella. Rather, you have to learn this way. So that often is the style that the Gemara doesn't use the word Ella. Rashi understands it that the Gemara is backing off from the previous discussion. But the way Tosfos wants to learn and others is that basically that the Gemara is explaining that even though a psik reisha, that normally this would be called a psik reisha, it's a psik reisha that you're taking berries, but you're inevitably making this into a usable hadas, so that should be prohibited. But because you have others, then we don't say that you're definitely making this. We don't say that this is a psik reisha, that you're definitely making this into a kosher hadas. It's a little complicated how Tosfos learns. because there are different ways of learning in Tosfos. The commentaries debate exactly how to explain Tosfos, but basically the way Tosfos is learning is that the answer of the Gemara is saying that this is not called a psik resha. And that's what the Gemara is backing off on. You asked me that this is psik resha. No, it's not called psik resha because I have others. So I'm not definitely using this. So it's not called automatic. And therefore, Reb Shimon would allow this because I have other hadassim. So this is not called a psik resha. There is a third way of learning, and the third way of learning is that there's a concept that something that's inevitable is only a problem if you can benefit from it. And so psik resha doesn't apply when you are not when it's not beneficial. It's called psik resha delay nechale. And that's a famous opinion in the laws of Shabbos. These are very well discussed. A lot of ink has been spilled on these discussions that I'm sharing with you here regarding the argument of Rabbi Yehuda, Reb Shimon. There's so much discussion in the laws when it comes to Hilchos Shabbos. And there's a famous opinion of the Aruch. The Aruch says that there's a difference. It's really based on a Gemara, but the Gemara that makes this difference, you could say it's still prohibited rabbinically. The Aruch wants to say, no, it's permitted. If you do something that's going to it's inevitable that it's going to make a malacha on Shabbos. For example, you're pulling a very heavy bed, and it's definitely making the ground usable, it's plowing the ground for you. If you have no benefit, you're totally indifferent to whether it's plowed or not. You have nothing in mind ever to plant this ground. You totally don't benefit from. Maybe it's even bad for you that it's so. But it is plowing the ground, but you don't care for that at all, and you absolutely have you don't have a benefit. Then, according to the Aruch, that's permissible. That's a psik resha. That's permissible. So again, you got Davar She'eino Miskaven, that's permissible, but psik resha normally ruins it and says it's prohibited, even according to Reb Shimon. And then you have, but if it's loy nechole, then it becomes permitted. And so the Aruch says this was exactly what our Gemara is saying. You have other Hashanas, so you don't need, you're benefiting zero from this Hoshana. You have other Hashanas. So because you're benefiting zero from this Hoshana, this is called a psik resha. You're really making it usable, but you don't need it. It's not benefiting you at all. And because it's not benefiting you at all, that's why it's permissible, according to Reb Shimon, that says psik resha is a problem, not in this type of psik resha. This is a psik resha that is like nechale. Now, not everyone agrees with the Aruch, but that's the Aruch's source. This is really like a good source for the Aruch as well. This sort of like proves his point. He says, look at the Gemara's answer. Isla Yeshana Achriti is not a psik resha. If you're not benefiting from it, then it's not called a psik resha. So that's the way the Aruch learns our Gemara, and that is definitely broad and discussed in halacha and so on. Yes, Mordechai.
What about a case, let's say, that there was a child who didn't know about the halachas of that you're not allowed to pull off the berries, and let's say they pulled them off, but not even to help the parent or whatever they thought that it would be interesting to take some berries or whatever. Then in that case, would it be permissible for the father to use that as a hadas?
So the thing is like that we already said that once it's done, it's okay. So there's no question. The question is if you're allowed to do it in the first place. Are you allowed to do this in the first place? That's what we're discussing here. That once you did it, we proved that it has to be that it's permissible to use. Because if it wasn't going to be permissible to use, then we can't prohibit you from doing it because you're not causing it to be, because you're not benefiting us. So the whole it all boils down to only initially are you allowed to take it. So here, this person is taking it because he's playing with them. He doesn't have in mind to fix the hadas. So it's the same thing as going to eat them. He's eating them. He's playing with them. It's not benefiting. It's not. There's no has no benefit from it being a kosher hadas because he has his lulav and shul. He's not planning on using this for Hadassah. So he has no.
Because
yeah.
Because it also kind of reminds me of, there's a story about, I think that in the base of Mikdash they used to on Sukkot they used to have these two large aravos that were next to the Mizbeach, and the Tzaduk on Shabbos, the Tzedukim didn't believe that you were allowed to use them, so they buried them, but then some Amei Haaretz came along and they didn't know that you weren't allowed to unbury them, and they unburied them, and so then they were able to use them on Shabbos.
I don't remember the story, but anyway, bottom line is here also, if it was done, it would be permissible to use on Shabbos. But the question is, in the first place, would you be allowed to remove them? And that's what really the discussion is: mematin or ein mematin b'yomtiv. Are you allowed to remove them or not? In this, we have this machlokes, and here we have, of course, we entered into a bigger discussion. I mean, this is a very I should mention this chapter of laws of lulav is a world-renowned, globally discussed chapter. This is very common. It brought all different, packed with insights. Every line, every paragraph here has brought in other areas of halacha and so on. Definitely in the laws of Sukkah, but laws of lulav and esrog, but also in other areas of halacha. There's all different things all different sources. A dichui we have here. Here we got Davar She'eino Maskavin. So it's this is a big topic. Okay, so one of the things I did want to mention was that yesterday I said that there seems to be an argument between the Bavli and Yerushalmi, between the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud, about this law of the reason for the law of discolored berries. Why does it ruin your lulav? Is it because it's not hadar, it's not beautiful, or is it because it's considered a fruit? It's considered
it's a sign of aging.
It's a sign that but the sign of aging is not the problem. It's a ripened fruit that means that this is not a anaf eitz avos. It's not a branch. It's not a branch that's braided. It's a branch of fruit. It's called an anaf eitz pri, not an anaf eitz avos. Anaf eitz avos mean a braided branch, meaning it has leaves, a lot of leaves. And anaf eitz pri means it's a fruit branch. So instead of it being, the Yerushalmi learns that the problem was that this is supposed to be a braided branch, and if it's black or red, it's a fruit branch. And that's the problem. So again, we learned the problem is hadar. It's not beautiful. If you have different, it clashes, the colors clash. This is not the green that the hadas is supposed to be. It's black and red. This is not nice for the hadas. That's the way Rashi learned, and that's the understanding of the Bavli, because the Bavli doesn't say a reason. This is a big chiddush to say the Yerushalmi's reason. The Gemara doesn't use such a term, that it has to be anaf eitz avos, not anaf eitz pri. It's not clearly mentioned here, seemingly. So the Bavli, is what it seems that Rashi understood, that the Bavli, this Gemara probably doesn't follow that understanding that the Yerushalmi says. And Rashi understands it to be that it's a problem of clashing colors. It's not hadar, it's not beautiful. But the Yerushalmi says that reason, that it's called a fruit branch, not a braided branch. And it's supposed to be a braided branch, and this is called a fruit branch. If it's green, so it's not a fruit yet. But once it gets red or gets black, then it's a fruit. Then it's called a fruit branch. That's what we learned yesterday, and that's a nice insight. It's brought in Shulchan Aruch. It's brought in the commentaries of the Shulchan Aruch. They bring this, and we mentioned that there might be a difference if it's a different color. If the fruit is a different color, would it be a problem? According to Rashi, according to the Babylonian Talmud, it is a problem because it clashes. According to the Yerushalmi, it's only a problem if it's a ripened fruit. If it's a different color, that's not a problem. It was a blue. Let's say you had a blue berry growing off it. Okay, but it's not a finished fruit. If it's not a finished fruit, it's not a problem. The problem is if it's a finished fruit, it's called a branch called a fruit branch. It's not called a fruit braided branch. So that would be a difference in halacha. Anyway, it's brought in the commentaries of Shulchan Aruch such an idea that there seems to be this difference. So what I wanted to add is that we also spoke yesterday about the bracha. If you eat the berry, is it edible or not? Now, Yushalmi says that the fruit, the berry is edible. So I was thinking that it could be that Rashi doesn't want to use this idea that it's called a fruit branch instead of a braided branch. He doesn't want to say that that's the meaning of the Gemara here, because according to the Bavli, it's not edible. The fruit is not edible, and because it's not edible, you wouldn't call it a fruit branch. Maybe the Yushalmi says clearly in Maisrus, the Yushalmi says that this is called that this is a fruit, that it's a chayv and meiser. So according to the Yushalmi, that it's a fruit, we could understand why that Yushalmi says now it's not good for hadas because it's the fruit. So I'm just connecting the two arguments when it comes to bracha and when it comes to using when it comes to the reason why the berries are a problem. I'm connecting the two arguments that the Yushalmi here and the Yushalmi and Maisra seems to be following the same way of thinking. That why does the Yushalmi say this reason of that it's a problem because it's a fruit branch is because the Yushalmi holds that it's actually edible. According to the Bavli, the berry is not edible, and because it's not edible, it's not a problem that it would be even if it would be ripened, it's not edible. So maybe that's why it's not. That's why Rashi doesn't want to learn this way. That it's not an edible fruit. So even if it's red or ripened, it's not edible. The problem is that it's not hadar, it's not beautiful. So that's just a little insight that came to my mind when we mentioned these two Yushalmis, that they sort of maybe they're following the same view. Maybe they're based on the same understanding. Okay, and the same thing with Rashi, that Rashi is understanding it based on his understanding of the halacha, which is that in Shulchan Aruch it's brought down that you say a shahakal on these type of berries. You wouldn't say it's not really a fruit. It's not the fruit of this tree. Or you don't call it that it's making fruit. It's even if you want to say it's edible, it's not really the fruit of the tree. This is not what it's. This is a happens to grow on. It happened to grow on it, but it's not a fruit. Even if you want to say it's edible, but you wouldn't call it. You wouldn't say a bar pri eit, bar pri adam. You'd say a shahakal. Anyway, that's just a thought. Okay, so we are now holding. Let's just go over the next little piece. So the next piece of Gemara mentioned that if the knot got untied, so you're supposed to. We brought a brisa. Gemara brought a brisa. Got untied. What do? Wrap it around with. With what some type of a binding material, bind it together with the way you would bind together vegetables. That's what the Gemara says. And obviously the logic behind it is you're not allowed to make a knot on Yom Tov. You can't make a knot on Yom Tov. So therefore, what do? Wrap something around it so it'll be tied together. The Gemara asks, yeah, you're not allowed to make a knot on Yom Tov, just like you make a knot on Shabbos, but you could make a bow tie. So make a bow tie. So that was the Gemara's question. The Gemara answered that no, Rabbi Yehuda holds even bow ties are prohibited. Aniva is considered kshira. The Brisa follows that opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that you're not allowed to make bow ties. It says just wrap it around like they do with vegetables. The Gemara asks, yeah, but you want to say you follow Rabbi Yehuda, that doesn't work because Rabbi Yehuda holds you actually need an eged. We hold that it's a mitzvah le'agdoi. It's nice to tie it together because it makes it look nice. So for us, we could understand that there would be a reason to bind it together, whether you make a knot or you make a bow tie. Okay, you can't make a bow tie. You can wrap it around. It makes it look nicer because it's bound together. It's a bundle. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's a mitzvah, it's a chiyuv, it's an obligation to tie it. According to him, you actually need a knot. And since according to him, you can't make a knot, because since according to him, you need a knot. And of course, on Shabbos, on Yom Tov, you're not allowed to make a knot. So what are you gaining by doing this thing? You're wrapping it around. You're not benefiting. You didn't gain anything, because according to, if you want to follow Rabbi Yehuda's view that a bow tie doesn't work, you can't do a bow tie, then what are you even doing anything for? Don't do anything. You can't fulfill the mitzvah because you're not making a knot. So the Gemara answers, yeah, the Brisa is not Rabbi Yehuda's view. The Brisa is following Rabbi Yehuda in one of his opinions about Shabbos, the laws of Shabbos making knots. But it doesn't follow his opinion regarding the laws of Lulav that it needs to be tied together. Because we're not following Rabbi Yehuda's view regarding the laws of Lulav, we're only following his law regarding the laws of Shabbos. So that view follows Rabbi Yehuda in one thing. It doesn't mean that he follows him in everything. And therefore, according to him, what do you do if your Lulav falls apart? What you do is bind it together like vegetables, like they bind vegetables together. Why don't you make a bow tie? The answer is because this opinion, this rabbi who's the author of this brisa, he holds that you're not allowed to make a bow tie on Shabbos. Oh, really? He holds you're not allowed to make a bow tie on Shabbos. So does it help to bind it together like vegetables? Does that help for the mitzvah of lulav to bind it together like you do for vegetables? You're not really getting far. You're just wrapping something around it and then stuffing it in. You're not making a bow tie. You're not making a knot. Does that help? The answer is yes. He doesn't hold like Rabbi Yehuda that you need to have an egged that has to be a knotted lulav. No, he doesn't hold that. He holds you have to. It should look nice. Look nice. That's good enough. And now we're up to the new Mishnah. The new Mishnah is going to talk about the laws of aravos, willows. Okay, so now we're going to start. It's going to be on page 33b, and we are maybe 8 or 9 lines from the bottom of the page. 8 lines from the bottom of the page. The Mishnah on page 33b. Avram, do you have it here? The new Mishnah. Okay, so Arava Gzula v'Yavesha. So here we have the laws of Arava's willows, a willow that is stolen or that is dried out, Yavesha. So the law is psula, it is invalid. Now, we understand the lulav and the hadassim, Arava, they all have to be lochem, right? We know that. So we know if it's stolen, that's a problem. Now, what's the problem if it's dried out? So obviously the problem that we've seen in the past is that it's not beautiful. If it's dried out, it's not beautiful. And a rava that's dried out is psula, yavesha. That's the term yavesha. It's dried out. It's brought in Shulchan Aruch, where the majority of the leaves, there's such a term brought in halacha, that if the majority of the leaves are dried out, now the law is psula, it is invalid. Then we have the same laws that we had earlier about Asherah, Shal Asherah, V'Shal Ira Nidachas. It was worshipped for Avodah Zarah. It's an Asherah. It's a tree that's worshipped. This is a branch, a willow branch from the tree that was planted for Avodah Zarah. Worship it for Avodah Zarah. So this is invalid. Also, if it's from an Ira Nidachas, a city that the people in that city were convinced, they were seduced to worship idols. And the law is that they gather all the possessions of the city, and it's supposed to be burned. And anything that's supposed to be burned is considered that it doesn't have a shear, it doesn't have the measure, and therefore, even though it's not burned yet, and you have this willow, but the law is that it's not going to be, it's not valid. It's not kosher for the lulav, for your daled minim. Not kosher to use. Niktam roisha. Here we have again this concept of the top being clipped off. Nifratzu aleha. The leaves fell off, and the hatzafzafa, and some type of a willow that grows by the mountains. The law is psula, it is invalid. Some say that it means that it's just a different type of arava, a different type of a willow. But the Rashi says over here that it's tzafzafa is a min arava, v'ola shala ogul. It's round. The leaf is round. And upasala mikra. It's invalid because the pasuk implies that it's not, that this is not a kosher lulav. So it's a tzafzafa. And the law is that it's psula. It is invalid. Now, kamusha, what if it's withering? Now, if it's withering, and if some of the leaves fell off, v'shel baal, or if it's an arava that grows on a field, that is a field that you don't need to water, it's rain, the rainwater is enough. That's called a field. It's called a baal type of field of a baal, and that type of field means a field that is sufficient rainwater. It doesn't need to be watered. And Rashi says it's karka shein tzricha lahashkos. You don't have to water this type of land. It's enough with the rain. And so that's the type of arava. All of these kshera, these are kosher. The Gemara says Tanu Rabbanan. The rabbis taught in a brisa. Arvei nachal. The pasuk says willows that are from a nachal. Nachal could mean a stream. So the Gemara says hagdelim al hanachal, that grow on a stream. That's what the simple meaning of the pasuk is. And of course, this Rashi says nachale mayim mitzvah bezu umiu shel baal kshedo kilakamon kedachsiv arvei loshen rabin. Rashi says here that the Gemara, although it says arvei nachal in the pasuk, and the Gemara says it means gedelam ala nachal, it grows by the nachal mayim, nachale mayim, a stream of water. Nevertheless, the Mishnah said that shel baal, that if it's on a field, that the rainwater it's sustained by rainwater, that's kosher. So it means that it's not growing by the stream. It's growing on a field that's sustained by rainwater. It means it doesn't need to grow on it. So what does it mean, arvei nachal? So Rashi says, yeah, arvei nachal mitzvah bezu. It's a mitzvah to use the arvei nachal, but if it's shalba, it's also kosher. Actually, I don't think most of the aravis that we get are really arvei nachal, because they all come from Muncie. And back in the day when I was young, I remember cutting them for the wholesale, the ships to the entire United States. And I don't think there's any river near it. It's he's constantly watering them. So it doesn't seem like the ones that it's called Muncie Aravis. Those are the most famous Aravis that everyone gets, and they actually are beautiful Aravis, but they are. But I don't think there's a nachal there. I don't think they grow on the stream of water. But anyway, it seems like there's a mitzvah to have. It's like sounds like an extra mitzvah. If you could have aravis that grow on a stream, that would be the ideal. Okay, now comes the davar acher. So the brisa continues, says another interpretation. Arvei nachal she'ola shala mashuch kenachal. that its leaf is drawn, which means it's narrow and long. It's like a stream. Kanachal. If it's round, so that would be a problem. Now, Tanya Idach, we learned in a brisa, another brisa. Arve Nachal, ainly ala Arve Nachal, I would think only if it grows by the stream. Shalbal, the Shalchara Minayin. How do you know if it grows on a field that it's rainwater, that's sustained by rainwater, and Shalharim, or that it's on mountains, Minayin? How do you know that those are kosher? Talmud Leimar, Arve Nachal, it uses the plural to teach that this is Arve Nachal Mikol Makom. In any way that they grow, it's going to be kosher. That is the second. This is another brisa. Okay. Now Abba Shol in the second brisa, they have the opinion of Abba Shol. Now we're on page 34a. Abba Shol Leimer Arve. When it says Arve plural, willows, it means shtayim. Means you need to have two. Achas lelulav, one to use for the lulav. Biachas lemigdash, and one to use for the mizbeach when they would go around the mizbeach. Now the Gemara says, v'rabbanon, and the rabbis, lemigdash menalahu, the rabbis that use this pasuk for another purpose to tell you that the reason it says plural is because all types of aravos are kosher. That's why it says it plural. According to the rabbis, lemigdash minalahu, how do they know that you need to surround the mizbeach, go around the mizbeach with the arava? How do you know that? The Gemara says, hilchas agamiri lahu. This is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, which, if you remember from the tractate Tainus, the Amar Rav Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Asi says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Eser Netiyos, the law of the 10 young plantings that are spread out in this 50 by 50 field, that regarding the laws of Shvius, there's a special law that you're allowed to whatchamacallit the land. You're allowed to plow the land before Shemitah, before the 7th year, all the way up to Rosh Hashanah. And the reason is, normally we tell you, normally there's a halacha that you have to be, add from the 7th year before it and after it, that you're not allowed to plow maybe from Shavuos or from other times, even beyond the 7th year, even part of the 6th year, we prohibit you from doing that. But with regard, because of these 10 young trees that need to be plowed, you need to plow around them in order that they don't dry out. So therefore, the law of 10, that there's this special law that it's allowed. Why is it allowed? So really, it's a halacha. It's a biblical law that you're not allowed to. The thing is, this is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, yes or netiyos. The law of arava, that you have to surround them, you have to go around them, is beach with the arava. That is also a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. V'nisuch hamayim, in the pouring of the water, and that's what was applicable in tractate Tainus, that they would pour the water on the mizbeach, on sukkahs, that pouring of the water, because normally you pour wine on the mizbeach. Here they would pour water. That nisuch hamayim is also, all of these are halacha l'Moshe Sinai. These are all halachas given to Moshe at Sinai. And these are this is the source for the rabbis why you need to be makif the mizbeach. You have to go around the mizbeach with the arava, which is the special concept of for Hoshana Rabbah, but we'll learn more about it, that they would surround the mizbeach. That would be, it's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Okay, we're going to stop here. Have a wonderful Shabbos, everyone. Sei gesund.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.